Hello, people. So, welcome to the last session of our discussion. To sum up what I said in the previous lecture, I was talking about the English educated Babu class in Bengal and how they became acquainted with European ideas, how they were reading Enlightenment intellectuals like John Locke. They were getting acquainted with his idea of tabula rasa and how empirical knowledge gets constructed by sensory experience, and how they were also getting informed about the idea of the innocent child and the emphasized importance of education, the increased importance upon education, the need to instruct the child with care, uh, and how they were also realizing the need for children's literature uh, in order to educate the children in a unique and pleasurable way. And as a result, how it traced the birth of, it led to the birth of Bengali children's literature. I talked about early works of Bengali children's literature like Madan Mohan Tarkalonkar, Shishu Shikha, and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's Borno Purichoy, and how they were strictly didactic in nature, and later works like Rabindranath Thakur's Sahaj Path, uh, and Jogindranath Sarkar's Chuti Chuti, which were, of course, much more entertaining. And then I talked about Upendra Kishore and his Sandesh. There were Bengali children's magazines before Sandesh, but Sandesh reached a height of unprecedented popularity. That is why I keep mentioning Sandesh, where Upendra Kishore struck a balance between traditional material like Ramayana and Mahabharata and new European knowledge like stories of geology and prehistorical animals. And then I went to Shukumar, how he finally started incorporating uh, characters of children who were not just innocent, obedient creatures, but who, like Lewis Carroll's protagonist Alice, or Robert Louis Stevenson's protagonist Jim Hawkins, who look to assert their identity. Somebody like Pagla Dashu, uh, the Pagla Dashu stories, where he is asserting his own identity. And then I finished with how this tradition was brought forward was taken forward by people from Shukumar's own family, people like Leela Mojumdar and Satyajit Ray. Talking about Leela Mojumdar and Satyajit Ray in detail, if you read the stories of Leela Mojumdar, she is not only bringing in boy protagonists, but she is also bringing in girl protagonists. And both the boys and girls in Leela Mojumdar stories, they are also like Shukumar stories, they are not obedient. And they are always surrounded by people, adults who try to control them, who try to dominate them, but they assert their identity in the face of such adults. I mean, in Leela Mojumdar's Podipishi Bormi Baksho, you have the boy who is being dominated by Panu Mama, and he's saying that when you go to Kudibishi's house, keep quiet because you know nothing. I'm going to find the Bormi Baksho, but it's ultimately the boy. Panumama fails, the detective employed by Dada Moshai fails, uh, and it is actually the boy who finds out the Bormi Baksho. And then again in Gupir Gupto Khata, it is the boy Gupi who turns out to be the smartest of all. In the story Maku, there are two girls, and the younger girl is, of course, the smarter one. And it is she who ultimately solves the mystery, who reunites everyone. Uh, the same thing happens in Nila Majumdar's other stories like Tongling and Holde Pakit Palok. Follows the same trajectory. She never really writes about obedient people, first boys or first girls, let's say. Leela Majumdar's boys and girls are not traditionally Gopal-like people. They assert their own identity. They do not get completely dominated by the adults. They are like Alice. They are like Jim Hawkins. The same thing happens with Satyajit Ray's Photik Chand. where you have the boy Bablu as the protagonist, but he also, when he accidentally gets kidnapped and then finds Harunda, he actually starts to enjoy this period of freedom away from home, and he does not want to return. Uh, he carefully hoodwinks both the police and the criminals. And when he finally returns home and he finds out that the adults are actually the bad ones here, because his own father cheats Harunda of his reward money. And when Bablu finds about it, he again hoodwinks his father, goes to Harunda, and gives him the prize money, which was declared for Bablu's rediscovery, let's say, for tracing him. So you have such kind of plucky boys and plucky girls making their appearance in Bengali literature, in Sukumar Rai, of course, and then later in Leela Majumdar and in Satyajit Rai. Uh, so now, what I'm going to talk about is, of course, I have been talking about cultural negotiations between English children's literature and Bengali children's literature. But now I'm going to look at it from a more extended scope, let's say, and I'm going to show how, even when Bengali children's literature seemed to be influenced and taking its ideas from English children's literature, it always maintained a careful distance from the ruler's discourse, so to say, because the English are the rulers, right? They are the colonizers, and we are the colonized. The power difference, the power equation doesn't change. We may be influenced by their stories, but there is always a difference between their status and our status. And it is perhaps due to that realization that we will find that Bengali children's literature has always distanced itself in a certain manner from blind imitation, let's say. Uh, and that happens quite early in Bengali children's literature, so to say. Uh, for example, I will again talk about Shivaji Bandyopadhyay's book, Gopal Rakhal, Dondо Samash. I will again talk about the book Gopal Rakhal Dondо Samash, and where Shivaji Bandyopadhyay says that if you read Borno Porichoy, you will find that Bengali writers of children's literature are always over enthusiastic to shape the children as obedient. And they always want them to be all obedient first boys. Uh, that is perhaps because the writers realized from a very early stage that these books are being written for boys who are being ruled, who belong to the ruled class. They are not like English boys who have the whole world for their taking, who will grow up and have the world, the British Empire to rule. These people are the ruled, the future men, the boys to whom the stories are being told, to whom these books are being catered. And as a result, this over enthusiasm to fashion them as perfectly obedient citizens, let's say. Uh, I was talking about a book called Dukkhojoyi Joy Jatra in my previous lecture. It takes its influence from Tom Brown's School Days, but the difference is there is an essential difference where Tom Brown's School Days talks about, Thomas Hughes talks about inspiring Tom, and he receives a lesson on the story of his forefathers, how his forefathers were famous people in England. They used to be great landlords, and Tom Brown gets inspired to go out and take the world, rule the world, let's say. In Dukkhojoyi Joy Jatra, however, though the central character, he enters the educational institution, learns a lot of things like Tom Brown, but there is never that kind of an enthusiasm to become the ruler, perhaps because he knows that he belongs to the class of the rule. And his primary achievement is to become a first boy, to get a medal from the magistrate, the direct representative of British ruling power, let's say. So that is a be all and the end all for him. No ruling for this guy, we can say. Uh, and then there is another genre which I would like to draw your attention to, and that is the adventure story. The adventure story, of course, became very popular right from the Victorian period in English children's literature. I'm going to spend some time on this genre. Uh, it becomes popular during the early Victorian period by writers like Frederick Marryat, where he shows young boy heroes who are going on journeys on ship to various colonial lands, and they are facing perilous adventures, and they are becoming more and more plucky and brave. Then you have writers like R.M. Ballantyne, who is writing the same kind of adventure stories, where you have boy heroes. Stories of R.M. Ballantyne, like The Coral Island, like and then you have G.A. Henty. I talked about his In Times of Peril in the first lecture. The boy heroes Ned and Dick, who come out of perilous situations during the Sepoy Mutiny. Uh, and then you have somebody like Jim Hawkins, the very famous boy hero of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. And you have David Balfour in Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnap. And all these adventures, fictional adventures, what are they? What do they mean? It is unmistakably evident that these fictional stories of adventures in distant lands are actually preparatory narratives of what they will actually have to do once they grow up. Because once these boys grow up, these boys from rugby school, uh, they will go to these colonies. They will take up the jobs of ruling the colonies. They will become inspectors, police inspectors. They will become magistrates and all. And they will have to go to faraway colonies. They will have to go to India. They will have to go to Africa, and they will have to rule the people with an iron hand, let's say. So there is this in the Victorian period. There is this urge to put a ruling mentality in the readers, the young readers, let's say, from their boyhood. And there is also another kind of narrative which becomes very popular during the uh, end of the Victorian period, the treasure hunting narrative. Of course, the exemplary text is Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. And then you have Henry Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines, where Alan Quatermain, Captain Good, and Sir Henry Curtis, they go to Africa and they discover a lost tribe, the Kukuanas, and they enter the cave of King Solomon, and they emerge with enormous diamonds. They take those diamonds. And there is, of course, a stage in the narrative where the witch Gagul tells him that you white men always come for diamonds and wealth in our colonial lands, in these lands. You want those wealth, don't you? So that is where it becomes very evident that these people, Quatermain, Good, and Curtis, they have a very capitalistic and economic motive behind their adventures, so to say. They are English people. They are coming to these lands of the Africans, etc. And you also have, and they're taking away valuables. And then you also have a book like, of course, it's not strictly children's literature, but the treasure motive is present. Wilkie Collins says The Moonstone, where they are carrying away the big yellow diamond from Tipu Sultan's Seringapatam during the loot of Seringapatam. They're taking it away from India. And that yellow diamond originally belonged to the god Somnath in his temple in Gujarat, let's say. And then you have the Sherlock Holmes story, The Sign of the Four, where you have the Agra treasure, the treasure of the Agra fort being carried away by the English general from India again. So there is always this kind of ruler's narrative present here. These people, they are going into adventures, but they are carrying away wealth at the end. This treasure, it is taken from the colonies, and the white man is carrying away this treasure as his wealth because he is ultimately the ruler, right? Uh, you also have treasure hunting narratives. Of course, these kind of treasure hunting narratives became very popular during the end of the 19th century in England. You have many such narratives. You have Haggard's Benita and African Romance. Uh, and then you have his Alan and the White Flower. You also have treasure hunting narratives in Bengali. Uh, the Guptadhan story. Uh, in the 20th century. Uh, you have works like Hemendra Kumar Ray's Jocket Dhon. You have his Abar Jocket Dhon, where you have the young men Bimal and Kumar. They are going in search of lost treasure. And Abar Jocket Dhon, let me tell you, is directly ripped off from King Solomon's Mines. The story is very much similar. Bimal and Kumar go to Africa. They also go into a mysterious cave and they also find treasure. But the point here is, uh, do these Bengali boys or these Bengali men, they actually carry away the treasure. You also have, of course, Chandir Bahar by Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay, where Shankar goes on an adventure. And there is always there is this unmistakable figure of the European pioneer who is taking his Indian sidekick, Diego Alvarez, the Portuguese. And Portuguese is very significant because it is a Portuguese who first discovered India, right? Vasco da Gama. They were the first Europeans to set foot on our country. So you have Shankar searching for diamonds in African caves again. But do these people actually carry away the treasure? You will find that they never actually carry away the treasure, these heroes. This is something very significant. In Jokethon, Bimal and Kumar do not actually get the treasure. It is Korali who tries to get the treasure, and then the treasure, the treasure chest falls into a ditch and it gets lost. In Abar Jokedhon, Makhon Babu, the villain, the Bengali villain, tries to get the treasure. But he grabs only a small portion of the treasure because he is being attacked by some unseen force inside the cave. And it is the small portion, and Makhon Babu reiterates the fact that it is nothing compared to the endless treasure being kept in the cave. This is just a small portion, something like a token. And it is that token which is carried away by Bimal and Kumar. Nothing more than that. In Chandir Mahar again, Shankar does not get the diamonds because he does not realize that those stones are diamonds. It is only after reading Attilio Gatti's letter that he realizes that, oh my God, that those stones which I mistook as pebbles, they were actually diamonds. And then he, of course, gets the three uncut diamonds from Attilio Gatti's pocket. Uh, and he does not even, I mean, how does he use those three diamonds? One of them he uses for buying cloth, food, bare necessities, and the rest he keeps for showing his mother. He does not get money from them, mind it. And he, of course, says that I will again return to Africa. But the point is, will he go in search of the diamonds? Maybe. But the greater motive seems to be solving the mystery of Hunip. Who is Hunip? And what is the mystery associated with him? His primary motive is not to get the diamonds. So why do these Bengali heroes do not actually carry away the wealth? They go in search of the wealth, but they do not actually carry away the wealth. Is it a very conscious attempt to differentiate them from the colonizing heroes? Is it, are these authors trying to tell you that colonizing heroes ultimately do everything for money? Mind it. They go on adventures, but they ultimately go on adventures for the money, for the wealth involved. Our heroes do not do that. They go to adventure just to have the thrill of defeating the perils and come out victorious. But they do not actually want the wealth at the end of the road. The wealth is immaterial. You have Bimal saying something like that. In a story called Sonar Pahade Jatri by Hemendra Kumar Rai, Bimal says that আমরা সুবর্ণ গর্ধব নই, আমরা গুপ্তধনের লোভে অভিযানে যাই না. We are not donkeys who are always after gold, let's say. It's a very odd translation. It came out in a very odd way. We are not people who are overwhelmed by the lust for gold or the lust of wealth, let's say. We go just for the sake of the thrill in these expeditions. That's that. Uh, that's a very, let's say, important difference. And then, so you always have these kind of little points of deviation, conscious points of deviation from the ruler's discourse. And then when you come to a writer like Satyajit Ray, of course, Satyajit is writing in independent Bengal, right? But he, through his writings, he is also trying to churn out a definite post-colonial philosophy, let's say, for these independent Indian boys. This is also very interesting because if you read his Feluda stories, in a number of stories of Feluda, Feluda has actually dealt with colonial history. His clients seem to have brought up, excavated stories of colonial rule. One such story, and I will want you to give a bit of attention here, because if you read a story like Gorostane Saptan, that's of course very much about colonial history, right? It talks about a Sahib, Thomas Godwin, and then Charlotte Godwin, and he also talks about a colonial piece of history in Shakuntala Kontohar and such. But what I want to draw into attention here is that in Feluda, you always see, even when the British rule was in vogue, there are romantic relationships, stories of friendship being built between the ruler and the ruled. For example, in Gorosthane Shabtan, you have Charlotte marrying Parvati Choron. And then in Gangtok Gondogol, you do not have a British, of course, you have a German, Birendro, Mr. Shelvankar is marrying Helga, a German woman, and Birendro Shelvankar is actually a racial hybrid. He's an Indo-German, right? So you have these kind of cultural connections, trans-cultural connections happening in Feluda. And Feluda seems to give a message that colonialism was a reality. It had many bad sides. It, of course, did extreme harm to our economy. It destroyed our national economy, let's say. It impoverished us in so many ways. But colonialism has happened. So let's get on with it. And let's face the reality as it is. Preserving hate will only make the matter worse. And he always tries to, Satyajit somehow always tries to put his focus on such stories of friendship, and that is why he always brings up these kind of stories of friendship in his stories, right? In his Feluda stories, we find uh, where uh, there is Charlotte marrying Parvati Choron, uh, and again transcultural relationship between Shelvankar and Helga, and hate really does not pay, because you have a story like Londone Feluda, where Ronjon Mojumdar, he killed Peter Dexter, right? Out of hate. And does that hate pay? Why did he kill Peter Dexter? Because Dexter was abusing him because of his race. He was telling him that you may know English, but you are actually a dirty nigger. And Ronjon Babu murders Peter Dexter. But does that actually lead to anything constructive? Because later we find that Dexter's brother, he was working in Darjeeling, and he finds out, tracks Ronjon, comes to his house, shoots him dead. So it's like an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. There is nothing positive in this kind of hate. The story seems to give a message about it. And then you have uh, somebody like Sudarshan Choube, whose forefather was killed by Reginald Maxwell. Reginald Maxwell, the Sahib, he kicked Sudarshan's forefather to death because he was a Pangcha Pardar, and he didn't really like his lack of responsibility. And Sudarshan takes revenge on Thomas Maxwell, Reginald's somebody who comes from Reginald's family. Sudarshan in Robertson and Ruby, the story. In Robertson and Ruby, you find Sudarshan hitting Thomas Maxwell in the head. But does the writer actually support such kind of an act? Because I don't think so. Because you have someone like Felu, whose attitude seems to be not espousing hatred towards British. Because in Gorostane Shabdan, he tells Topshe something like, yeah, the British have done a lot of bad things, but think about it, Topshe. The British have also given us something, have they not? Just realize, just imagine your Feluda, Pradosh Chandra Mitra, private investigator. What would he have been if the British had not come? He would have been slogging away writing books and writing books in some Jomidari Sheresta. He would not have been a private investigator. The very job of a private investigator is a colonial, is a European invention, let's say. The detective is very much a European invention. And Feluda's attitude always seems to be a balanced one. He does not espouse breeding hatred towards Europeans. Uh, for example, this Thomas Maxwell in Robertson and Ruby, he falls into doldrums while shooting a shraddha. The locals get very offended. They try to hit him and teach him a lesson. Feluda intervenes. He tells them not to do it. He says that this Sahib is our guest, so do not misbehave with him. And he placates those local boys, let's say. But that does not mean that Feluda has a servile mentality. That will be a total misinterpretation, let's say. Because in London Feluda, we have Archibald Cripps, who uses racial abuse, racially insulting terms against Indians. And Feluda directly retorts. He tells him, I do not need your help in this investigation. Thank you. You can go. And he almost drives him away. And Lalman Babu says that, wow, Felu Babu, the way you showed the Sahib his place in London, and that's really something, isn't it? So Feluda always has this balanced post-colonial attitude. I have been talking about colonial Bengali literature, and now I'm actually talking about post-colonial Bengali children's literature and how it is still negotiating with the British the British culture, the British counterpart of children's literature, because Feluda actually takes its cue from European English young adult children's literature, right? Feluda himself says that my guru is Sherlock Holmes. So, but being a post-colonial Indian, he has this nuanced attitude towards the colonizers. He acknowledges their misdeeds, but he also says that, well, uh, what has happened. Let us have a balanced attitude towards them. Let's not get carried away, so to say. And then, of course, but he's not a servile man, right? I mean, Anglophilia is something which Feluda does not have. It will be wrong to call him an Anglophile. And Satyajit also, in his short stories as well, he shows how uh, Indian people with excessive Anglophilia are shown their place. In a story like First Class Kamra, where a man who was very much fond of English people comes face to face with an English ghost, a ghost of an English colonial ruler, and he faces terrible treatment, terrible racial abuse, torture, etc. Of course, the so-called ghost turns out to be a man in disguise, but well, that is that. The man, the Anglophile, gets a bitter taste when he meets an English ruler, let's say. So he's cured of his Anglophilia. And then you have some story like Nila Tonko, where a man goes to spend his night in a Nilkuti, and he wakes up and finds that he has been possessed by the ghost of Nil Kaur Sahib, uh, an indigo planter, a British indigo planter, who is very oppressive. That's very obvious. So Shotojit is acknowledging this history of oppression. So it is this kind of a balanced attitude which he always seems to espouse through Feluda and through other stories as well. So this is a kind of a post-colonial mentality which is coming in these stories, how to negotiate with the rulers, how to negotiate with our past. And I will finish with saying a thing or two about children's literature after Shotojit and all. Of course, even in Shotojit, you have a global Bengali in Professor Shonku, who's going to places as an Indian, and he's again keeping his Indian heritage intact. Because he strictly believes in non-violence. He does not believe, like the Sahibs, like the Americans, he does not believe in money, in capitalistic motives. He does not believe in using violence as a solution, Shonku. He cannot tolerate bloodshed. So he is global. He's going to places, various European cities and places, but he's still an Indian. An exemplary post-colonial Indian, let's say. And then you also find the global Bengali children's hero in people like Kaka Babu. So uh, so much for the discussion. I think I have made some sense, and I have tried to make clear how enlightenment gives rise to various new ideas about childhood, and how English children's literature, European children's literature gets born, and how the Bengalis after that, they are getting influenced by these ideas, and in turn, they are giving rise to a Bengali children's literature. But in spite of being influenced by English children's literature, Bengali children's literature is not a simplistic imitation. I hope that much I have been able to convey. It is always going through a kind of complex negotiation with the ruler's discourse, and it is always being very, let's say, aware of the fact that the English are our rulers. So we cannot really imitate everything that they are doing. So there is always this kind of deviation from the main ruler's discourse. And that is how the Bengali children's literature is becoming something unique. And even in the post-colonial era, I mean, after independence, Bengali children's literature, you find it is still negotiating with this fact that how to deal with our colonial past, how to deal with our colonial legacy. So that's it. Thank you all for listening to me for so long. It has been an absolute pleasure. I thank Ramanujan College for inviting me to do this. It has been a very, very enriching experience on my side. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.